we have a problem. As we know, baby boomers are leaving in mass exodus style the work roles and the leadership roles that they've occupied for so long. And the challenge is that as individuals continue to leave the workplace, they're leaving a leadership black hole. What do I mean by that? I mean that the generations that are below them have limited experience in leadership roles, and that gives them limited knowledge of how to lead organizations at the highest level. Generation X and millennials are continuing to enter leadership roles, and they are entering them without the high-level strategic vision and organizational experience that it costs or that it will take to lead organizations into the future. So the challenge is that the number one problem organizations have is a lack of effective leaders. And the challenge also becomes that when leaders get into those leadership roles, or when they engage in new organizational responsibilities, 38% of individuals who are promoted into a new role of leadership fail to achieve their objectives within the first 18 months of that role. That's a huge number, and it has significant consequences in real dollars in terms of what we as organizations hope to achieve and what we actually spend within our organizations on training and development. So let me give you some understanding of that. The first thing is that the annual market for leader development continues to grow. In 2015, organizations spent about 35% of their total training budget specifically on developing leaders. That equals $160 billion that we spend on leader development. And what is the problem? Well, 70% of workers are disengaged, 60% of workers leave their organization because they can't stand their boss, and disengaged employees in 2015, according to a Gallup poll, cost the American economy $550 billion. Now, those of you who are in leadership roles in your organization and who are looking to develop leaders yourselves, the question I have for you is this: are your workers engaged? Will your workers quit your organization because their managers are ineffective? And how much will that cost you? Because the average HR cost to acquire new employees and to develop and recruit and get those employees onboarded is around $40,000 a person. So when you're listening to this organizational message that we're talking about, think about the term leader. What does that mean? Because leaders actually have an important role. A leader is a person who sees themselves and is seen by others as coordinating, collaborating with others to achieve common objectives. And I'm going to break that down a little bit for you. So here's what we're talking about. A leader is a person who identifies themselves as being in charge of and responsible for the outcomes of other individuals. It's important that we understand leadership, because the ship in leadership refers to relationship, and that's the part in the second definition where we refer to seen by others. And that's, according to the definition of relationship, means that I engage in something with you in terms of how I lead you, and you accept that leadership, and therefore we're engaged in this relationship where I trust you, I see you as a trustworthy person to get my life to a qualitatively and quantitatively better position. The last part of that definition, where we talk about coordinating and collaborating, refers to when individuals here are looking at achieving objectives. And what do we want them to do? We need you to work with us as individuals to achieve common objectives. So the being, knowing, doing model, which is what BKD is about, talks about who people can become as a leader. We refer to that as their self-concept and their identity development. And we want them to understand what their unique leadership approach is, because as you continue to grow, you must change the way that you use your leadership in various circumstances and contexts. We want people to know about leadership because we want them to think in different ways according to the demands of their leaders, or excuse me, their followers, and the situations in which they continue to think about critically. Because as you grow as a leader, the more that you have experiences, the more you're going to apply those experiences to become a better leader. And next, how do I practice leadership? And this talks about the actual art of leading, because we're never going to get it right. And the one thing I want to impose upon you all is that as you continue to grow on your leadership journey, you need to give yourself a break, because as leaders, we continue to improve every day. And if we continue to practice the art of leadership, each day will be better than the next. So that makes it the question. If each day is better than the next, are we continuing to grow as leaders, or are we just born as leaders? Well, let's take a look at that. Give me 1 second. Okay, so are we born or are we made? This is a question of DNA versus the environment. Let's get into that a little bit. There's been amazing findings in DNA research, and they've done some twin studies. This is coming from a guy named Rich Arvey out of University of Singapore, a former American scholar. And what he and his colleagues have done is they've actually traced specific genetic markers, and I list them right here, is the gene expression that you can find that is related to actual leadership emergence. When I talk about leader emergence, I'm saying specifically someone who occupies a leadership role. So what are the characteristics of those individuals, and what happens when an individual has this CHRNB3 trait? Well, these individuals are more likely to have a disposition to actually take on leadership roles. In other words, when there's an opportunity to lead, if you have this specific genetic marker, you will take that opportunity to lead. And if you don't have that specific genetic marker, then you are less likely to actually volunteer yourself to occupy a leadership role. Now, the next thing on there is personality when we think about extroversion. And intuitively, we know that intelligent people and people that talk a lot are viewed as leaders because we think they're comfortable in social situations. There's some other things that we want to think about with regards to our personality traits, such as openness to experience, because openness to experience allows us to engage in non-normal situations that put us in our discomfort zone. And leaders who have this specific genetic marker are more comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And so they're willing to take the chance and be open to that new experience. Another thing is that individuals with this specific genetic marker are more likely to have an achievement orientation, and they're more likely to strive for continuous success across platforms and across developmental opportunities. They set goals and they achieve them, and they also are more likely to strive for continuous improvement throughout the course of projects and throughout the course of their professional development. These individuals that have this genetic marker are also more likely to select leader environments. And what that means is when there's an opportunity for individuals to take a lead, they're more likely to put themselves in risky situations than individuals who do not have this specific genetic marker. And it's fascinating because they're willing to take a shot at leading when others will not likely do so. So when I think about this, I think about, well, would I take that opportunity to lead, and is it too risky for me? And I evaluate whether or not the chances of success are high so that I will look good, or whether or not it just matters that I'm leading. Because individuals who have this specific genetic marker will actually take the risk regardless of their personal concerns. They like to actually lead, and they'll do it whether or not they can succeed or fail. And finally, with this specific genetic marker, what we're looking at is sensitivity to information. What that means is that these people have an ability to actually process complex information and spit out decisions that are accurate, precise, and impactful. So, are there other genetic markers that have been found to be important? Well, the DAT1, and they have a repeat allele of 9 and 10, it refers to a dopamine transporter that we found, is related to complex cognitive function, meaning that these individuals take large quantities of data, crunch them in their head quickly, and then spit out a response that is logical, rational, and rooted in strategic objectives. Also, one thing is that when there is a high level of dopamine, these individuals, in this particular allele, these individuals are less likely to have proactive personalities. And one thing that we know about leaders is that if you're not doing something, then you're not leading. And it's important for leaders to be proactive because they need to take charge, command authority, and use that authority to achieve common objectives. Well, individuals who have a high level of this dopamine transporter oftentimes will not take the initiative and will not be proactive. So if you're ever wondering why it is you have an employee who simply doesn't step up to the plate, who simply leaves early when you know that they need to stay late, it's likely because they have a lower level of proactive personality, and that's associated with negative likelihood to lead. Also, high levels of this dopamine will lead to less self-regulation. They're more likely to have outbursts in meetings, more likely to say irrational or unconscionable things because they have a low level of regulation in front of individuals. They also will disclose things about themselves, and we have a common language for that. We call that TMI. And what it does is it makes them look too vulnerable, and too much of themselves is exposed, and so people don't see them as leaders. And this is all related to a specific genetic marker. Also, they have a low change orientation. And one thing we know in the modern workplace is that leaders who are able to change and adapt their organizations are more successful, because the one thing that will continue to increase is the rate at which organizations need to change. And if you have this specific genetic marker, these individuals are less likely to change and are more resistant to change. Also, their lower likelihood of persevering when the tough gets going. And so the challenge is that when you look at someone, you say, well, why are you quitting? And you just say, well, it's an attitude. In fact, what we're finding out is that it's not an attitude, it's a genetic trait. And so on the bottom there, you see a plus next to the rule breaking. And I hope you find that interesting, because one thing we know is that we can now trace back positive leader traits to breaking rules. And you might say, well, why is that? Well, the reason is because leaders should not ever continue on with the status quo. In other words, we need to change, evolve, and innovate. And individuals who have this specific genetic marker are more likely to break the rules and challenge the status quo. And that's particularly important during times of crisis or times when organizational change is absolutely essential. And we need to find leaders who are less change resistant, can have a higher level of perseverance, and are also likely to break the rules. So what's that mean for us? Let's do some takeaways. Takeaways here are for you as an individual. It's important for you to identify your own key personality traits and your own key traits that have to do with your genetic markers, and start to understand where your DNA does control your destiny and where you can actually go ahead and make a change by being proactive if you're not wired to do so. Recognize that it's not part of who you are, and then take the steps to change who you can be as a leader. As an organization, what we want to do is look for leader traits in employees. Oftentimes we make the mistake of promoting people who are simply high performers, and we do that at the peril of the person who is a high potential. The challenge that organizational leaders has is that we think that individuals who perform well will lead well. Well, I have news for you. Leading is different than performing. Yes, we can perform in a leadership role, but being good at your task-oriented job does not mean that you want to manage and lead others who are also doing that job. So if you want to know who's a leader, look for people who break the rules, who challenge the status quo, who are proactive, persevere when the tough gets going, are extroverted but know when to give people a little space to talk, who are intelligent, who are more likely to step up to the plate and put themselves in a leadership position. Now, I've just told you as a takeaway here about things that are important for why people emerge as leaders according to their DNA. And I'll send you the references if you ask and you send us an email, and you can do that on Facebook or LinkedIn. Well, the question becomes, are leaders made according to their environment and their identity? And the answer is yes. The challenge that we have as individuals is to look specifically at the things that help us. When we grow up, we're nurtured by our individuals in our home, and those individuals help us understand and give us confidence and belief that we can lead. We engage in educational experiences, and we talk about exposure to new things. Well, what we want to do is we want to grow our network, and we want to take opportunities to lead and look at various components of ourselves and get the development that we need in order to go ahead and get trained, so how we can actually see the growth and development opportunity. So the question becomes for us whether or not we are, as individuals, able to lead, and if we're able to actually go ahead and take advantage of being an effective leader. Well, the challenge for all of us as leaders is that we want to look at some models here of what leaders do and what they say. And whether or not you like the Patriots or not, They have 4 Super Bowl trophies. And effective leadership can be seen in their actual activities. They're accountable, they have authority to one another, they are effective decision makers, they solve problems, and they get the job done. And this is an effective leader prototype for us, and that's what we want to focus on. And you'll see here down in the bottom left-hand corner, the general who addressed racism in the United States Air Force Academy. And this individual was talking to over 500 cadets and standing up for his belief in what we should have as a value structure in the United States Air Force. And he stepped up and did this effectively to change the culture that they were having at the Air Force. And finally, in the bottom, we see Sam Shriver, who is the, we see Herb Kelleher, who is the CEO of, former CEO of Southwest Airlines. Now the question becomes, for us, what do we think of as leadership traits, and how does our DNA affect that? Well, 32% of the factors that lead to us being in a leadership role are attributable to our genetic makeup, and only 24% of those things are heritable. When we think about leader selection, the challenge becomes that individuals look at us and they use all of our traits. 50 to 82% of how we select leader is based on their traits, all the things that we just discussed. However, 68% of the reason that someone will end up in a leadership role is due to the environment, the training they get, the experiences they have, the exposure to leadership they have. And finally, we can attribute leadership effectiveness to our biology, our values, our intelligence, and our personality. More so, though, is the importance of knowledge, skills, and ability. And this is what we want to focus on as we go through and we develop leaders in our training and development exercises. So here are some key takeaways for this section. First, seek development and learn always. And for organizations, it's important that you provide leader development training that emphasizes being, knowing, and doing. And the importance of that is that you'll develop the human being, you'll develop how they know leadership approaches, how they think about leadership, and how they practice leadership. So stop investing in skills and start investing in human beings, because the better the human being, the better the leader. So I want you to see one last thing here before we go on. As you continue to learn and continue to evolve, understand that your early learning experiences help you form mental models about what leadership is. And as you grow, you become a novice leader and you start to claim leadership roles and you start to form an identity about who you are as a leader. As you mature, you start to focus not on who you are as a leader, but what you can achieve at divisional levels. And you begin to start to think in collectives. In other words, it's not about me, it's about we and what we can choose. And at this level, you're really using one style of an approach. As you become an expert, though, and you continue to grow in maturity in your leadership journey, you'll use multiple approaches, and each of those will be attached to a different part of yourself. And each of those things will grow you to be the best leader to meet your objectives and change your approach, okay?